Here we are. We're in this series called Dare to Move. And as we think about this series, the challenge has been that here's a fundamental truth, I think, about the Christian life. And that is, as you seek to open your life up to God and walk in faith with Him, God is going to get you to move. It may be having to move in an area about your relationship with Him. Maybe you need to learn to trust Him more. Maybe you need to learn to know more about who God is. Or maybe God's going to want you to move in relationship to others. That how you have chosen to respond to others, maybe with anger or bitterness or judgment or greed. God wants you to move in the direction that He wants you to move in, of forgiveness and mercy and justice and truth. So over this series, we've been challenging you to think about, where does God want you to move? Again, just as a sort of a secondary statement to this thing about life and faith, as you journey along, as you sort of come to, I always find summer for me is actually like the new year. It's like I've gotten through my work year, and I kind of go, okay, it's summertime. God, what have you been doing in my life? All of us should take times of reflection and times of just sitting back for a moment and saying, God, where have you been moving me closer to you? And if you never bother asking yourself that, then you're missing out on part of what the journey of following Jesus is all about. You should be on the move. Now again, how fast, how quick, whether you feel like, I got lost, Dave, and now I'm just getting back on track, that's fine. But the issue always is, and I don't care if you're a young person, a middle-aged person, an older person, it doesn't matter. There should be movement in your soul and in your life with God. So if you haven't followed our whole series, I'd encourage you to go on our YouTube channel, TJC Moncton of the Journey Church. Just go on our website. You can check out all the messages. And the first week we talked about that. If you're going to move, you have to grow. You have to grow spiritually. What are your practices of spiritual growth? Think about that. Be intentional about that. You have to be growing, because without growth, there is no life. The next week, we had Dr. Dave Toyson here with us, the former CEO of World Vision, and he talked about if God's moving you, then you are going to influence the world. And I love the connection, because it was Mother's Day. He showed how mothers influence their families that in turn influence the world. And he talked about how his mom shaped his life, which in turn he touched literally tens of millions of people throughout the world. And then last week, and again, this was our video cast of Brent Hudson, our teaching pastor, but Brent talked about if we're going to move, we are called to move towards peace. Now I want you to stop and think about that, because Brent talked about the wisdom of violence that we all buy into, that when we get hurt, we hurt back. And yet, God is a God of peace. Jesus brought us the gospel of peace. Jesus made peace between us and God, and He also is calling us to live as peacemakers in this world. And that needs to root itself into our families, into our relationships with our friends, with our neighbors, and even our enemies, instead of buying into the wisdom of violence. If you did not watch that message, I encourage you. Brent is a gifted biblical teacher. He's theologically astute. He's honestly one of the best gifts we have here in Greater Moncton. If you don't listen to Brent Hudson, you're missing out on a real gem, okay? Now, I will admit, when you listen to Brent, he's like, how you can have light dishes and then you go home and have a real solid, meal? He's more on the solid meal, you just don't peel through it as opposed to my messages, okay? So Brent's just a little more intense, and I really appreciate that. Well, today we're going to talk about another area. And it's ironic, I think, in a way that we're preaching on this today. We're going to talk about not only when God moves us are we called to spiritually grow, and we're called to influence the world, and we're called to peace, but we're also called to have a good understanding of work. I really believe that one of the biggest areas of our life is work. In fact, when you really stop and think about it, so much about our life has to do with work. For you to come to church today, you had to get up and do some work. And especially looking at some young mothers here, I know you worked getting here to church. And then I'm looking at mothers with teenagers, I know you worked getting here to church. So the point is, but we all work. Work is such a core expression of what life is all about. And what I want to do today is that I don't want to convince you that we live in the reality of work. That's just sort of saying we have to breathe, we have to wake up, there's a sun in the sky. It's just part of our human condition. But what I want to ask you is this question. Here's the question I want us to look at. And I encourage you to take notes on either the paper copy that you were given, or you can go onto our YouVersion app, or you can go to our Journey Church app, look at resources, and then click that, and you'll get to our outline as well. So take advantage of either digitally or the paper copy. But I'm going to give you some great pointers today about work. The question is this: how do we move our work so it becomes good work? How do we move our work so that every day as we're working, we can say we're doing good work? It's a very fundamental question. Wise is the parent who teaches their child to work very early in life. But the thing is that I can't help but think that so often for a lot of people, work is still considered a drudgery. I came across a poll by monster.com. This was a global poll done by them. And it reveals that 76% of people in the USA that filled out this poll report having what are called the Sunday night blues. And actually, they rated it the really bad Sunday night blues. I got the really bad Sunday night blues. I got to go to work tomorrow morning. I don't know what I'm going to do. Okay, that sort of thing. Sorry for the singing. But the point is, and actually, this has gone up from 2013 when Monster.com did this poll as well. Back then, it was 73% of the respondents said, 73%, 3/4 of the people going to work on Monday morning said on Sunday night, I did not feel good about having to go to work Monday morning. Now, you can say, well, that's just the USA. They don't have good working conditions. Well, globally, 63% of all respondents around the world said, I don't feel good about going to work. I've got the Sunday night blues. Now, what do we do with that? Because when we think about that, we got a problem. Because what we're saying is, and if that's true, that means right now, at least 3/4 of you who are working, 3/4 of you who are working right here in front of me, don't like your work. In fact, the last thing you would be saying is, oh, Dave, I'm doing good work, Dave. I'm doing really good work. No, you're going to say, Dave, I got those Sunday night blues. In fact, what you're telling me is that instead of your work being good work, your work has become bad work. Isn't it interesting that when we think about that, you would tell me all the reasons why your work is bad? And what makes work difficult? What makes it bad? Well, let's be honest. At work, we can encounter greed, evil, self-interest, immaturity, stupidity, insecurities, lack of cooperation, poor communications, right? Misunderstandings, and then just on-scene problems. And we know every week all of those things and then some are added to our work. So you say, Dave, how can you tell me work can become good work when we have to face all this? I just want us to understand something, though. And this kind of goes back to us going through the story. Remember how when Adam and Eve, disobeyed God and humankind fell, we call it the fall, and there was brokenness that entered the world? Well, that brokenness entered our work as well. But what we must never confuse is that work in and of itself is still a wonderful thing. It comes from God himself. I mean, in creation, it says that God worked for 6 days, and then one day he rests. The very nature of God is to work. I think of what the psalmist says in Psalm 64. They will proclaim the works of God and ponder all that he's done. Or as Paul writes in Romans, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. And in fact, in Ephesians, Paul also goes on to say that we have been created to do good works that God has planned in advance for us to do. God wants us to work. He works. A fundamental expression of being made in the image of God is when we express our love and our service to others through work. Work is inherently good. So let's get back to the question. Instead of you having the Sunday night blues in regards to your work, and oh, by the way, the Sunday night blues doesn't refer to just paid work. This could be the work you have to do within your home. This could be the work that you have to do in your volunteer ministry here at the Journey Church. This could be the work that you have to do with your family. Doesn't matter. Work comes in all these expressions. But the question is, how do we move work to good work and pull it out of bad work? How do we transform our work? Where does God want us to move in that direction? How do we move in that way? Well, I want us to look at a passage of Scripture. It's right on your outline, but let's bring it up. It's Paul writes this in Galatians 6:10. He says, so then, whenever we have opportunity, let us work for the good of all, especially for those of the family of faith. Let us work for the good of all, especially for those of the family of faith. Now, as a pastor, I love that little Paul jab at the end to say, if you're working really hard, for your place of employment, that's great. If you're working really hard for volunteer organizations throughout the city, that's absolutely fantastic. Work for the good of all. But he says, but don't forget your church. Don't forget your family of faith. I mean, they need people to show up and serve on hospitality and help out in children's ministry and help out in the music and, give Rocco a break off the hard sticks there that he just pounds away on the drums. I love his drumming, by the way. But, I mean, we all, we need people who will show up next Saturday morning at 9 a.m. and say, I want to give 3 hours of my time so we can clean up the house of God so it's as presentable as my beautiful home wherever. Paul's saying, especially for the family of faith, be prepared to look for opportunities to do good. But notice the phrase there. Look for opportunities to do what? To work for the good of all. Now, if you're following me in this, you're saying, okay, so Dave, what you're saying is the Bible is telling us that we need to work for the good of all. And I want to tell you that if you're going to turn your work into good work, you've got to think about this. Am I going to work with this mindset of saying I'm going to work for the good of all? Now, I just want to give you a quick heads up. If you're going to work saying I'm working for me, Dave, I'm climbing that ladder, I'm taking care of business, I'm taking care of myself, you've already missed the point of this passage. Because Paul is saying, look, you should look for every opportunity to work for the good of all. Now, if you're with me so far, the next question in your mind should be, how then, Dave, do we work for the good of all? How do we do that? Like, that sounds so good. Let's work for the good of all. But what does that really look like in real time? Well, it comes down to one word. Give. If you're going to work for the good of all, you have to give. In fact, what we would call God's wisdom at work, at play for your life and mine, is every time you work, whether, again, it's in the context of your family, in context of your neighborhood, in context of your vocation, your profession, whether you're retired and you're working in a retirement, doesn't matter. Whether you're doing it voluntarily, whether you're doing it where you're being financially compensated for it, if you're going to apply God's way to your work and you want to move it from work to good work, you have to hang on to one word, and that one word is give. You're going to go, wait a minute, Dave. What do you mean give? Well, I want to read something from a guy here. His name is Adam Grant. He wrote a book called Givers, Takers, and Matchers. And I really encourage you, especially for those of you who are in management leadership in your work, or I would encourage you as parents to get this book and put it on your shelf to give it to your young people as they think about what does it take to be successful in their work life. But Adam Grant teaches at the Wharton School of Business, and he did some research, and he found out that who is the most satisfied at their work and who ultimately becomes the most successful at their work. So he did a huge amount of surveys, and here's what he found out. He found out that there are 3 basic kinds of workers at work, and you pay attention to this. And again, this applies to whether you're in a volunteer organization, you're a church, or you're in your place of work. Now think about this. Adam Grant says there are takers, there are matchers, and there are givers. Now the takers see the workplace as a competitive dog-eat-dog place. If I don't look out for myself first, takers think, no one else will. So they're always worried about their parking spot. They're worried about their office space. They're worried about, did they get their time with the upper management? They're worried about their pay. They're worried about, did I get my bonus? They're worried about, did I get the recognition that I deserve, because it's all about me. That's takers. Matchers are the next group. Matchers believe that in the work relationships, they are governed by even exchanges of favors. They're the ones that say, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Oh, I don't mind doing some overtime right now and staying as long as you stay next week. And I want that signed in blood. Those are matchers. I'll take a step as long as you take a step. I'll go in this direction as long as you come too. But if you're not going to match it, then no way am I going to be taken advantage of. So there's takers, there's matchers. The third group are givers. And they are other-focused in their work. They pay more attention to what other people need from them. Their hallmark is their generosity at work. They're known to be givers at their work. Again, whether it's voluntary or whether it's paid. Now, let's pretend there's 100 workers sitting in this room right now. Actually, there's about 100 people here right now. There's 100 workers here. Percentage-wise, how many do you think are givers at work? So don't go by percentage, just go by number of people. If there's 100 people, out of that 100 people, how many of them would be known as givers? Go on, throw some numbers at me. 5. Someone else. 10. 20. 78 are givers at work. Okay. You had something before you came here, but anyway. Okay, according to Adam Grant from the Wharton School of Business, all his research says that if there are 100 workers, 8 of them are givers. 92 are takers and matchers. And if you're honest, you probably think about your own workplace, you go, you know what? That's true. Most people assume that in the workplace, givers will never get ahead in their career. And also what happens is when people get stressed out in life, and we all know what that's like, what is people's first instincts? They draw into themselves, and the last thing they're going to do is give at all. Grant's research consistently shows that givers are among the most successful people in business, and they may also be the happiest. In one study, Grant found that givers who were high school teachers were less vulnerable to stress and exhaustion if they saw the impact their giving was having on their students. Being a giver at work also has lasting benefits on their well-being outside of work. In one of Grant's studies, 68 firefighters, those who helped others on the job, felt happier at home at bedtime than those who did not. Grant, in his study, asked this question that I think is relevant for us today as we try to apply Paul's teaching about if you have every opportunity, let's work for the good of all. And as we think about this very critical question about work, because it's such a big part of our lives, how do we move our work to become good work? here is Grant's question. Would you rather achieve success at work that comes at the expense of others or in ways that lift other people up? In other words, what Grant is simply telling us is this. If you want some good career advice, give. Give. I mean, it's going to be a very easy message today. You can say, what did Pastor Dave preach on? Give. No, surely he said something more profound than that. Actually, I'm saying something very profound. Give. If you have your outline there, we used a quote from Bill Gates. Bill Gates makes this observation. There are two great forces of human nature, self-interest and caring for others. And I wish I could tell you, I wish I was as hopeful as Rilla was, said, yeah, 78 people out of every 100 workers give at work. And yet the reality is, self-interest always has the gravitational pull on our souls. Always. And yet if we're going to do good work that we feel is substantive and is life-changing and actually has eternal significance in light of God's plans for us, we have to lean against that gravitational pull, and we have to say, God, by your grace, we got to give instead of worry about having self-interest. We got to care for others. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Dave, people are going to take advantage of you. I mean, they're just going to walk all over you, and I'm no doormat. Yeah. Yeah, that's possible. In fact, it will happen. In fact, Adam Grant in this book actually points out one thing. He says actually givers actually line up on the work scale of success in two places. They're either at the very bottom or they're at the very top. Because often the giver is the one who ends up having to stay longer because he or she's helped everybody else with their work. They were the ones willing to be interrupted more than anybody else. They were willing to say, hey, let's help this out. Let's get this cleaned up, and then I'll deal with my work later. I just want to drive something home here. I've given you some illustrations from people who've studied human condition around work. And they're making these observations that giving makes sense, even though it doesn't make sense in the moment. But I wanted to take you back to the very words of Jesus, where Jesus talks about God's economy of giving. And this is what he encourages us to do when we're living in God's way. Jesus says this, give, and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. If you're chintzy in your faith, then you're going to have a chintzy faith. If you're small-minded in your faith with God, then you're going to be small-minded in the blessings that you're going to experience. You've got to be willing to give. Give unreservedly. Give with joy. Give consistently. Because that give is rooted in a profound experience of God's love. A few years back, we had a funny thing is it was a stewardship campaign, but actually it's a life truth. We said you cannot love without giving. You notice that? If you really love someone, you're going to give. You're going to give of your time. You're going to give of your treasures. You're going to give of your talents. You're going to give if you really love someone. And then our second statement to that was, and without giving, you cannot grow. Because it's as you give that all of a sudden new things start to happen in your life. I mean, Jesus says this is the way it is in God's kingdom. And when God's at rule in your life, you got to become a giver. And I know that part of the brokenness of our lives and our sinfulness is that when we get hurt, what do we do? What do we say? I'll never be taking advantage of that again. No way. Fool me once, burn me twice. never again. And we sort of make these internal promises that we're going to hold on and we're going to hold back and we're going to wrap our arms around our souls. And we become, the more we wrap our arms around our souls, the smaller our souls become. God, if he wants us to move our work to good work, one word, people, we have to, what? Oh, you see, I know it's hard, but we're going to get this. We got to what? Right. We got to give. Okay, well, I got a few minutes. Let's just really do some really practical applications about how give looks. Because you could say, okay, Dave, I'm going to give. Tonight, when I'm having the Sunday night blues, I'm going to rather sing the hallelujah of giving. And so I'm going to give. I'm going to get up tomorrow, and I'm going to give. I'm going to give. I'm ready to give. And you're saying, oh, wait a minute. Well, what does that look like? How do I give? Okay, this is really important. You got to take some notes here if you haven't taken any notes yet. Here are some ways to give. There's an app for this, people. There's an app for this, okay? So here we go. Here's the first way you can give at work. Share information. It's funny, I find that some people, they like holding information close to their chest. Hey, Dave, if you got a minute, I got something to tell you. Nobody else knows this. Just you and me, Dave. And when I see someone behaving that way, I think that they are misunderstanding what information's all about. See, they're using information now for their own selfish ends. They're using it as a leverage for power, because we know that knowledge is power, right? Come on, we know that. If you know something, it puts you in a position of influence. But if you're a giver, you're going to share information readily. You'll walk in and say, hey, everybody, did everybody hear about this? Hey, everybody, did everybody see that memo? Hey, everybody, while we're having this discussion, are you aware of? Or how about this one? Linda, just before I leave, did you hear about so-and-so? I ran into them at the store, and they're telling me they're having surgery this week. What can we do about it? Not 2 weeks later, I didn't know so-and-so was in the hospital. Well, I knew. I know it all. Well, thank you for sharing that information. Share information. Here's another one. Give credit and share blame. Okay, this is a sports illustration. Mark Cuban, owner of the Dallas Mavericks. They were in a tight game. Of course, he's one of those owners he sits right on the bench with his players. He's really involved, maybe a little too much. That's another issue. But the point is, they're at the end of the game, and it comes down to their team is fouled. When the players go up to shoot, all they got to do is put the two baskets in. They win the game. The first shot goes in. Everybody's cheering and screaming because it's at the Dallas Mavericks home stadium. The second shot is missed. They go into overtime and lose the game. After the game, they come up to Mark Cuban. Mark, what did you feel about that free throw? That player had just got those two shots in. So how are you feeling about that? And Mark Cuban says this. Listen very carefully. He says, when that player got that first shot in, he did a great job. But we missed that second shot. Did you catch that? He did a great job when he got the first shot in, but we missed the second shot. When you're giving credit, you give credit specifically, personally, and publicly. Just a tip to all you people who are managers. Your value of encouraging someone, if you go up to them privately and say, good job, that has about a 1 out of 10 hit for them. But publicly, if you say, boy, Rocco does a great job playing drums, and we really appreciate him using his musical gifts. Right on. You see? That is giving credit publicly and personally all at the same time. But if we have a problem, we go, our church really is kind of dusty right now after a long winter. And boy, we have a problem. We got to clean up this church. We need to clean up the dust. So we have a spring cleaning day next Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Right? See, we share the blame. We share the problem. Challenge you to do that in your marriage. Challenge you to do that as you work in your family. Challenge you as you do that. If you want to move your work to good work, this is one way you can give. You can share the blame and give credit. Here's another one. Help others network. You know, one of the most powerful things, I read a story, is that one guy, he made a promise to himself. He said, every day in my work, I'm going to introduce someone to someone that don't know each other, and that will be what I do. And so that's what he did. He introduced people. He just said, hi, do you know so-and-so? So-and-so, this is so-and-so. And he introduced people. Years later, he started to get feedback from all of these introductions he made. And people had started multi-million-dollar businesses together because he had introduced them. People had gotten married because he had introduced them. People had developed deep friendships. People had discovered new opportunities because he had introduced people to one another. This is a way you can give at work. Are you going to use your influence to introduce other people to other people? And say, hey, do you both know each other? Do you know, can I even encourage you that when you're doing the work of ministry here in this church, before you just rush out after you shake Linda's hand, take a moment and say, I know so-and-so, but do these two people know each other? Because it's possible when you introduce those two people, they may become spiritual friends that they're going to encourage each other for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, all because you took time to do the work of giving. Here's another one. Be a mentor. Pour your life into people. Pour your life especially into the next generations. Yes, they have new ways of looking at things. They've got great new knowledge that maybe you don't have, but you've got life, wisdom, and experience that they need that encouragement. You need to frame your life into the next generations. Be open to mentoring. Here's another way to give at work. Respect others' time. Here's one thing. Can I encourage everyone when you go to work? And again, this is voluntary or paid. When you're talking to someone, just ask them this question before you start talking to them. Do you have time? Do you have time to talk right now for a few minutes? And if they go, take that as a physical cue or clue that they don't want to talk to you right now. But then rather than just being totally oblivious to that and say, well, they didn't say yes or no, they were physically trying to tell you, but say, can I call you some other time? That's respecting other people's time. And here's another way you can respect other people's time. And this is what this is my new initiatives, one of my resolutions, is I'm terrible when I walk in and start talking to someone, I start saying, hey, beautiful day. Yeah, you look good. Life's great. Of course, they're saying, Dave, what do you want? What's your point? Get to the punchline, Dave. That's another way you can respect other people's time. Get to the punchline. And finally, offer solutions, not just problems. Like it's important to point out problems. I like people who have the courage to say, Dave, I think we have a problem here. But can I tell you again, whether you're working with a peer, whether you're working with your boss, whether you're working with an underling at work, when you walk in and point out a problem, take some time before you point out the problem and say, but here's a solution I think that can help resolve that problem. And even if all you can say to that person is, I've taken some time to think about some solutions, but this is so complicated, I'm really not sure what the solution is. At least now you're coming in with a level of humility, rather than going, hey, there's a problem, fix it. As though that takes a lot of intelligence. Offer solutions as well as pointing out problems. Okay, let me wrap it up. Remember, we're trying to answer this question. How do we move our work so it's good work and we don't have the Sunday night blues? And if we're going to apply God's wisdom to work, we just have to remember one word. What's that one word? Give. Give. And we just talked about some specific ways. But I want to end up on this. You know, those are real specific ways of giving. Can I recommend one thing? I think of what Paul says. He says, But these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Can I encourage you that ultimately what we should be giving to others in all types of work we're in, we should be giving people faith, we should be giving people hope, and we should be giving people love. I want to finish by reading this story about one expression of how to give faith, hope, and love in real work time. A global missions expert, Paul Borthwick, shared the following story to show us how God's work can be from anyone, anywhere, at any time. A young man named Peter, writes Paul, reminded me of a modern-day Philip. I stopped into a McDonald's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I noticed Peter working the counter. And I recognized him from our young adult ministry at church. And I knew he had just graduated from Harvard University with a master's degree. I greeted him and managed to get him to break free for coffee together. "What are you doing here?" I asked, knowing that the Harvard master's degree students don't usually aspire to work behind the counter at a McDonald's restaurant. "Well," he explained, "I graduated in May, but I went 4 months without finding a job, so I said to myself, well, I better get some income to pay some bills. So this is where I've ended up, at least for now." "Oh, man, sorry to hear that," I replied. But Peter cut me off. "No, don't be sorry. God has me here. This place has given me some awesome opportunities to share my faith. I'm on a shift right now that includes a Buddhist guy from Sri Lanka, a Muslim fellow from Lebanon, a Hindu lady from India, and a fellow Christian from El Salvador. It's awesome. I get to be a global missionary to my coworkers while asking, would you like fries with that?" He laughed, and so did I. And like Philip, Peter found himself in a setting he never would have chosen as part of his long-term work plan. But his mindset as living as a sent person from God shaped the way he looked at his circumstances and at the people around him. Every day, God's wisdom at work is that we're called to give. But I think the things we can give the most is faith. And we can give hope. And we can give love. So then, whenever we have an opportunity, let us work for the good of all. Let's give. Remember, we can take the path of self-interest and come up with all the justifications for why we need to take care of ourselves in that way. Or we can follow the way of Christ, who did his greatest work for us by giving himself for all of us. And that's the mindset we're called to live. So remember, if tonight you start getting the Sunday night blues, just start singing that word, give. God, by your grace, help me to give. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this morning. Thank you for this time where we can wrestle with this very clear call of what it means to be a people of faith, to move closer to you, to live within your will. Lord, we cannot love without giving. Amen.